How's it going, crypto community? This is Jade Martian, and you are watching the Martian Report. To all my XRP Martians out there, thank you for tuning in. If you're not a subscriber yet, please hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit that like if you enjoy this video, and if you really enjoy it, make sure to ring that bell. Before we jump into this, I want to apologize to everybody that's watched part 1 and 2 who's complained that the sounds of the video were a little bit low. Hopefully, I've managed to figure out what's going on with that. And just to be safe, I'm going to turn up the sounds of the video here. So we'll see. Hopefully I've gotten it balanced out to a degree that everybody can be content with. As I've said in my comments a few times, though, sounds seem to be the bane of my existence. So hopefully this will be a conflict that we can resolve quickly. But without any further ado, let's hop into part 3 of Christine Lagarde discussing G20 and the global economy.
Now is that the Europeans wouldn't be as dependent on the IMF financial resources as they were before, because presumably the European Stability Mechanism has the $500 billion, but more importantly, the ECB has got an unlimited amount of euros that they could use. You know, that the OMT is pretty open-ended.
Well, yes, and you might argue that thanks to the European Court of Justice and the various recourses and the various actions that were taken against some of the decisions made by the European Central Bank, the European Central Bank board and its president will know within which parameters it can operate and with what prior consent, prior consultation, and so on and so forth. So there is more room. Is it unlimited in the way the Fed could be? I think you need to ask Mario Draghi before he goes.
Well, I guess I was just thinking of his comment is that he would do whatever it took. You know, and I guess that's.
Oh no! We had a big discussion on that because he said, you're right. He said that was the day when the London Olympics started. We had that same day of conference, and he said, because we debated that. He said, within my mandate. And it was critically important, particularly vis-a-vis. I think both the Bundesbank and the Bundestag were very concerned that within our mandate
was sotto voce. That I don't think the markets saw that. They just saw that whatever it took. And I just wonder whether you might not use that technique in the next crisis, that the fund will do whatever it takes. It seems to work magic. Let me ask you in terms.
So that little back and forth was mostly them discussing the previous crash, if you weren't aware, and the methods employed by the European central banks in order to, the at all costs mentality to prevent the fallout that could have came from the previous 2008 financial crisis. And the moderators basically just saying, hopefully we don't have to face that again, right? Or hopefully the IMF doesn't take apologies. The IMF hopefully doesn't take a similar stance this time around, So hopefully I reset the video so that hopefully we're not seeing that screen tearing. I don't know about you, but it triggers me, and so I'm sure it triggers some of you. I apologize. I don't know why the stream continues to do it. Hopefully the refresh fixes that though, and we'll find out. But, let's hop right back into it.
It seems to work magic. Let me ask you, in terms of IMF resources, what is the situation with IMF resources? In the following sense, if we were to have another crisis, it seems that these crises take quite a lot of money to resolve. So if you did get, for any reason, a crisis, is the IMF adequately financed, or is there more that you need to do on that front?
Oh, there's always more that I would like to do. But let me give you two numbers. Our capacity to commit at the moment is roughly $1 trillion. So with the reserves and everything else, we have roughly $1 trillion that is available and that we can mobilize in order to help countries around the world. The second number that I want to give you is $500 billion. And the $500 billion is how much we actually committed during the great financial crisis. So when we had this massive financial crisis, short of a Great Depression, we committed $500 billion, and I think we were instrumental, together with many others, in trying to avoid that the Great Recession turned into a Great Depression. So how did we do that at the time of the Great Financial Crisis? We had, and in the structure of the resources, we had quotas, which is a bit like hard capital, and there were new arrangements to borrows that I represent for myself as sort of syndicated medium to long-term loans. And some of those were actually converted into quotas over the course of what we call the 14th review, which is like a capital increase. But the borrowing, which is done much more easily, was increased, and some of the borrowing was put into quota. What I want to make sure happens, because we are reviewing our capital's status and our resources envelope, is to maintain our overall resource envelope. And short of increasing the quotas now, what I want to do is increase these syndicated loans, the new arrangements to borrow, as it's called for those who are in the know here, so that the total capacity to commit remains at $1 trillion. Because you never know. The next crisis can be worse than the last one. So we need to be sufficiently strong. And I think we need to give markets the signal that the fund is going to be equally strong on the occasion of this capital and borrowing reviews. So that's
I guess one.
So that's the precarious perch that we sit upon, right? Which she just spent the last 3 minutes explaining, that I'll probably spend another 3 myself explaining, is that our global economy is on the verge of collapse, and the IMF has a whole $1 trillion to try and patch the balloon that's now popping. Here's the issue. As she pointed out, during the Great Financial Crisis of 2008, as she referred to it, the Great Financial Crisis, the organization had to dole out half of that, $500 billion, to get us out of the crisis we were in 2008, 2009. Now they only have $1 trillion. That bubble that we were in has inflated dramatically so, and it's expected that we would need somewhere in the range of, depending on which economist you ask, anywhere between $5 trillion and $50 trillion to correct our upcoming crisis. And that's kind of terrifying, right? That she just told you that she only has 1/5 at best of the money that they need should this current bull run trigger a financial crisis, the likes of which we saw in 2009 with a liquidity crisis, right? That's why what we're going to discuss at the end of this video, what Madame Lagarde is going to discuss at the end of this video, is so critical. And it's why I'm doing this series, because so often I find that cryptocurrency investors, they're only interested in, when somebody drops those buzzwords that you're so familiar with: blockchain, XRP, Ripple, interledger, interoperability, right? You gotta, I know that this is kind of preaching to the choir, because, those of you who are tuning in to me are tuning in because you obviously want to learn more about what's going on a global stage. You want to learn why it's so important that someone like Christine Lagarde has Ripple's back, and thus you as an XRP investor's back. The system has, just been being kept alive as best these organizations can, because, it's not that they're, like a lot of people want to go and throw Illuminati labels around and whatnot, or New World Order, as Brad has even said, that we're entering a New World Order, and that freaked out a lot of people back last year. But, what you need to keep in mind is that these people aren't necessarily evil, or, some of them might be selfish and entitled and greedy. Most humans are to some degree, but the idea is that, ultimately these people don't want to see the system collapse because they're the ones that have the most to lose, So whenever I hear people talking about Illuminati and their whole plan to bring down the world, it's like, why would they bring down the world when they already rule it, right? Why would you destroy a system that you have helped manipulate over your course of your life to put you at the top? That doesn't make sense. What makes most sense is to do everything in your power to remain near the top while moving with time in the changes as they come at you to ensure that you are well prepared for whatever is to come, right? But that's my insight onto what Christine Lagarde was just discussing as far as the cost of the previous financial crisis and what I have in my research found to be the cost of this upcoming crisis. The range that is quite large, but still, even the low end, like I said before, is 5 times what the IMF has to dish out in case of an emergency. Also, if you hear my neighbor's wonderful dog next door, I'm really sorry. I can't control him. But I'm going to mute this mic, and we're going to go back to listening to Christine so you don't have to hear him, right? All right, let's continue. And there's the ad. Thank you for starting that before I press play. Thank you, Brave. I hope you all enjoyed that ad from Brave Browser as much as I did. Apologies. Let's go.
Work underway.
I guess one area that might give you some room is that just what we've been discussing about Europe is that this time around, Europe can take care of a lot of its own needs, whereas presumably last time around, the big IMF programs were in places like Greece and Portugal and Ireland. Presumably this time you're going to have the ESM and the OMT that can help, so perhaps you might have some room that you didn't have in that previous.
Yeah, fair enough. I think the global financial safety net, as we like to call it, has changed. No question about that, because the European Stability Mechanism is one big pocket of financial availability that is there, only for European countries. But you also have in various corners of the world, in Asia, for instance, you have the Chiang Mai arrangement, under which countries of Asia Pacific, short of full description of the countries in there, have also aggregated resources for the rainy days. So they have funds that is available as well, under which we have a close collaboration and which we have sort of stress tested in order to make sure that if something happens, the Chiang Mai arrangement, which I think has $250 billion available, and us can actually operate together in an efficient way. And then you have a few other sort of pockets of financial resources that are available as well that could be mobilized eventually. I think what the G20 leaders are all saying is the IMF is at the center of the global financial safety net, and we have to play a critical role because we've been doing that for 75 years this year. It's our anniversary, actually. And we have accumulated experience, expertise. We know how conditionalities can function. We don't always do it to perfection, but we have tried as hard as we could to improve it and have a recovery rating, which is not bad.
Right. Well, I guess that's another reason why one would want.
So, real quick before he goes on into this being a reason, what the reason is, just to clarify Christine Lagarde's statements, is that, yes, the IMF only has this $1 trillion, right? But like the ECB, the OMS, which is the only thing I can find is Order Management System, which is an electronic system developed for some financial instruments to trade utilizing. So it's either that or it's an organization that I'm not familiar with. That's why you saw me pull up Google in the middle of that, just to make sure that I wasn't going to make myself sound like an idiot. Because I assumed it had to do with the oceanic monetary region, or the monetary system there. That's what I assumed it meant. But back on to the point, what she was stating again is that, the IMF has $1 trillion that they can unload on the global economy if necessary, but that these these regional financial structures do also have their own funds that they could put forth. But again, you have to keep in mind that the IMF is the most prominent force in regards to monetary power when it comes to financial crises. Pardon me. That is exactly why the IMF and the World Bank, excuse me, it's exactly why these institutions were founded, though, right? So to help stave off systemic decay as a result of poor regional financial policies that could then have bled out into the global economy. The IMF and World Bank were established to help prevent such events from unfolding. And what's really wild is that we're witnessing this kind of event actually unfold in real time between the United States and China, as we discussed in our previous videos with Christine Lagarde, right? That the United States and China are, even though they are the most powerful economies, they are by and large responsible for this shift we're seeing in the global economy away from the traditional gold or U.S. dollar-backed financial system that most of us, while I've been listening to this video, since most of you are under the age of 50 according to Google algorithms, most of you are born into this system. You haven't known another financial system other than this fiat one that we've lived in, right? I know I sure haven't, and even though I have accrued a great deal of knowledge about what this system, how the system was implemented and everything, I wasn't there to be able to see how that really affected society, right? I kind of wish I was. I really wish I could be a little bit older just so I could have experienced that and then seen through it, how it changed everything. But I think that it's pretty obvious, because there's a reason why most Americans, at least, look back at the late 50s to through the 70s as like the most economically powerful time in our history's nation, when it was a golden age essentially for us here, and everybody was hunky-dory. Everybody had a great job that paid great. Everybody had that, was living that American dream, or by and large the majority of our population was moving towards that. And once we moved away from the gold standard, we watched as our nation's liquidity, its financial power was distributed around the world to facilitate a even more luxurious lifestyle for us, which quickly decayed, right? As we've witnessed over the last 50 years, that system is decayed to the point where none of us really have faith in it, to the point where you and me as XRP investors are now in XRP as opposed to USD, right? Or any other currency that you may use from your home nation. You're holding cryptos for a reason, because you don't trust your centralized currencies anymore. But it should also be noted that this panel this interview that Christine Lagarde is giving here, it's pretty clear from her stance and Desmond, the moderator there, that this system is sort of has been a necessary evil. It's not perfect, but they're making it work as best they can until something more perfect does come along. And we're eventually going to talk about that something more perfect, right?
Want these various trade disputes resolved, because this really doesn't create the right kind of atmosphere for international cooperation, or the United States has had such a role of leadership of resolving crises, working with the IMF, so hopefully that gets resolved pretty soon. This morning you put out a blog in which one of the factors you mentioned that is of some concern is the big increase in corporate borrowing.
Yeah.
That it seems, the United States, not only the United States, but I guess the emerging market economies, that their corporations have been borrowing a lot, and that what we're seeing a deterioration in the credit quality. I think that Mrs. Yellen keeps mentioning, the United States leverage loan market of something like $1.3 trillion. aside from having a concern, there's not much that we can do at this stage. That seems to be a problem that we've got to live with. That's the result of past policies, or were there some kind of policy prescriptions you had in mind?
Yeah, so she's going to get ready to speak, apparently. So just to touch, he basically summarized what I just went on that tirade for a few minutes about, we just gotta work with the system that we have, and there's not really a lot that they can do about it yet, but they're looking for solutions, right? That's what Desmond's response was, which is, by and large the response that I gave you. But let's see how Christine Lagarde continues this conversation forward, right?
I think it's a problem that is not only a problem in the United States. The corporate debt is prevalent pretty much across the board in all countries. And what is of additional concern to us is the quality of that debt, which we see as having declined here, as having declined in Europe as well, in many of the countries comprising Europe. Clearly. In a period of accommodative monetary policy as we have it, and as we will probably continue to have it, and legitimately so in our view until numbers actually firm up and we see inflation rising its head a bit more, we are seeing an accumulation of financial vulnerabilities. That's what we're saying also in the G20 surveillance note. So short of using monetary policy because we have no inflation, because we have rather sluggish growth, then other tools need to be used. And that's where macroprudential tools have also been developed, elaborated. I don't think that we have enough history of the impact of macroprudential tools to actually say, well, this works, this you should use. The kind of collaterals that are used in those leverage loans should be transferred or changed. But I think it's coming along, and there are many more central bank governors now who are comparing notes and looking at prudential tools to see what is effectively working. And we're beginning to see good signals. But that has to be, financial stability has to be a concern which should not necessarily interfere with the monetary policy, and which requires, in our view, an additional set of tools, the prudential tools.
So, these prudential tools that she's referring to, this global system that she's referring to that has very little real-world test examples to rely upon to determine whether or not this is going to be an effective system. What is this prudential tool system? Will you discuss it further, Madame Lagarde? I think that we have a suspicion as to what it is, but we'll see if she actually jumps in, right? I do believe that she is talking about blockchain technologies, though. She's just using a more financially friendly term for it for her audience of, by and large, financial institution representatives, right?
I guess I could just finish before I turn, we could use the remaining time that we've got for questions from the audience. Just a couple of questions on the emerging market economies. One, the program in Argentina has had its problems. I was just wondering how you see that right now. Are they getting things back on track? That would be the one question. And the other is there are two economies that seem to have real difficulty, real crises on the currency side that could have big impacts on the economy. The one, of course, is Venezuela, and the other is Turkey. I was just wondering whether there's scope, or at what stage can the fund get involved with those two countries?
Well, first of all, we have to be asked. And that's a big precondition, because if the authorities of a country do not want to ask the IMF to be involved, no matter how we regret, lament, and feel terribly sorry for the people in some instances, that is certainly the case for Venezuela, there's not much that we can do. All we can do is prepare as much as we can on the basis of numbers that we have no control over, an economic situation that we've not been able to audit for the last 15 years because we have been barred from accessing, the normal, delivering the normal mission that we have with all members. So all we can do is, from a distance and based on sporadic information and contacts that we have with a few people who are still on the ground, is try to assess what, in our view, based on what we've seen, is likely to be just the most difficult, protracted, and complicated economic situation that we have seen. And not just economic, because you have a humanitarian crisis, you have a food crisis, you have a currency crisis, you have inflation which is in the millions %, and the debt situation which is extremely complex as well. So you have to bring this all together. It's like having, you take the 3 worst cases of crisis resolution that we have ever handled in the history of the IMF. You bring them all together, and that is Venezuela.
It's like a war situation.
Oh, it's really a. And we don't have the data, we don't have the tools, we have not seen it in real life, other than through the prism of the humanitarian crisis that is playing out.
Turkey must.
So, really, again, we're talking about the emerging markets and how they're completely unraveling, at least in the case of Venezuela and Argentina now, and a few others. But Venezuela was the case example that she was giving, that, what was just a financial issue has spiraled out of control into this, this starvation, social economic collapse that has resulted in them not even having a stable currency or any kind of stability in their social framework. And so what we're seeing is a complete degradation, a complete breakdown of their system, right? So it's something that we haven't seen, at least in recent memory, in a individual such as apparently Christine Lagarde hasn't even seen it, and I swore that we had such events happen back in after World War II ended. But I guess there was Russia and a few others, but perhaps she just simply wasn't well versed back then when this happened. So now that she's witnessing it, it seems like something for the first time. But either way, her point still stands that, when you're looking at these systems, how big and complex they are, it's really hard for even the professionals who spent their lives dedicated to researching this to really be sure that what they're doing, their solution that they're attempting, that they want to attempt, is actually going to be effective, right? It's a huge concern, because if they get it wrong, they don't get to go back to the drawing board and say, oh, well, let's try it again. No, thousands of lives, in some cases, millions or tens of thousands, or, too many lives will be lost if they make the wrong decisions. And that translates from Venezuela to the global economy as a whole. And that's something you as an XRP, as a cryptocurrency investor, need to really keep in mind. That if we get rich really quick, just a heads up, you're probably not going to be rich long, because if you get rich really quick, to me that's a sign that the whole global system is collapsing, and therefore it doesn't matter that you have your virtual currency, because nobody's going to be using any currency, digital or paper or otherwise, in the next few years if things get too crazy in the traditional system. We have to, as a global society, as national societies, as local town societies, we need to ensure stability in our society, in our community, in order to continue forward, right? We can't just let it all burn and start from scratch, right? Because when we let it all burn, you don't just rise up from right where you left off. No, you burned it, right? You burned your community, and now your community is gonna burn you, and they're gonna try and burn everybody until there's only the people left that agree with the most powerful voice left in the room. That's how these play out. That's how power vacuums are filled. That's why it's so prevalent that the IMF and all contributing parties, whenever it comes to whatever agreement is reached, that agreement is as thoroughly investigated to ensure that it will not cause any instability in the global system that is already on the verge of collapse, right? So they're trying to they're trying to lift 100-ton boulder with soft hands, because if they don't, then it's going to crush the person who's just right now, it's just their leg under it, right? But if they don't move it carefully, that boulder could roll and crush the person who's trapped under it, right? That's basically the best analogy I can give for what the global financial community has to try and deal with right now in regards to what's going on in the global in the overall global economy, right? So we're gonna let her finish her statement here. I'm gonna try and get to about the 45-minute mark, and then we'll call this episode 3. It's probably gonna be the longest of the series, but I want to leave part 3 or part 4, which will be largely where Christine Lagarde talks about digital assets. I want to try and see if I can't have that be its own segment, and that's going to be, something for everybody who's enjoyed this series through, to be like, hey, now we're finally hearing about what our investment is how our investment is involved in this series that I've brought you so far, right? So let's finish up here, and we'll see what else we can talk about before we end this video.
Must be more hope that something can be done.
Well, I hope the authorities can actually handle the situation and can they have a teeny tiny bit of fiscal space. They have a private sector that is massively indebted. They have inflation running high. They have a currency situation which is also pretty dear. And I don't think that President Erdogan would actually pick up the phone to ask me whether the IMF can come and help.
But this would be a classic case for the IMF to do something.
Yes.
Right,
yes,
but I
yes.
understand
but
it takes
maybe,
two to tango.
Yeah, exactly right. Which takes us to Argentina.
Right, okay.
Naturally.
That was, I had thought of that segue. No, it's not true.
In the case of Argentina, first of all, I'm reasonably and hopefully positive about the most recent developments. It's an economic situation which was incredibly complicated as well. That I think many players, ourselves included, underestimated a bit when we started trying to help and put together with the Argentine authorities a program to address what had been critical for their economy, which was the fiscal position, which was the current account position. On both those accounts, the situation has significantly improved and is continuing to show signs of improvement. I guess the most surprising component, but which is improving now in the most recent numbers that we received, is inflation, which instead of stabilizing and gradually declining as we had anticipated, is showing much more resilience than we had thought. It is now beginning to decline, but it's taking longer than we had anticipated. I'm hopeful that with a steady continuation of the program as it is, with the monetary mass as the anchor of the program as it is now, I'm really hoping that the Argentine program will actually turn out to be successful for the Argentine people and for the Argentine economy. There are political, developments that will come into play over which we have no control, of course, and which will be the decision of the people. But from an economic point of view, very hard legacy inherited by the previous team. Difficult situation to address from all angles, fiscal, current account, inflation, and the issue of the exchange rate, which is like the barometer for the people. But my hope is that, keeping steady, hopefully
and
will
there, of
deliver.
course, the Macri government is very committed to the program.
Oh yes, they are.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave it off at there with Christine leaving some closing statements on how the IMF has assisted Argentina with the ongoing financial crisis that they've faced on and off over the last few years. And there you heard that she obviously has found hope in an otherwise bleak scenario, in that it seems as though the IMF and Argentina's combined efforts to resolve their financial crisis is, at least at the moment, going the right way. But again, that recovery seems to be far slower than at least Christine Lagarde believed that it should have been. So, this is something that remains up in the air. But that's all that we've got for you here today. This video is probably going to be at least a half hour, so I'll just wind it up here, and I'll see you guys in part 4. Once again, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that like. If you're new, hit that subscribe. If you enjoy my content a lot, and you're just a masochist, or a sadist for my, masochist for my voice, masochist was right, ring that bell, and you'll be up to date and be able to hear my lovely voice every second that or the second that I put something new up, right? So, as always, I hope you've appreciated. I've been Jade Martian. You've been watching The Martian Report. I look forward to seeing you and all my XRP Martians in the next video. And as always, I'll see you on Mars.